On a Halloween night in 1974, a tragedy shook the town of Deer Park, Texas, turning what should have been a night of tricks and treats into a dark and unforgettable event. Ronald O'Brien, an apparently devoted and loving father, took his children, Timothy and Elizabeth, for the traditional trick-or-treating, along with a friend and his children. The children went door to door, excited by their costumes and the promise of sweets. Ronald seemed like any other father, joining in the fun of the children that night. At one point, as they approached a house where the lights were off and no one answered, Ronald insisted they wait a bit longer. He claimed that someone in the house had given him some candy and handed out pixie sticks, a popular candy of the time, essentially a tube of flavored sugar, among the children. When they returned home, the children were tired and eager to eat the treats they had collected throughout the night. Later on, Timothy, Ronald's son, asked his father for permission to eat one of the candies before bed, and Ronald suggested he try the pixie sticks. Just a few minutes after consuming the treat, Timothy began experiencing severe pain and started vomiting, losing consciousness within moments. Ronald panicked and immediately called an ambulance, but despite the doctor's efforts, Timothy was pronounced dead just hours later. The news shook the community, and Timothy's death raised national concern over the safety of Halloween treats. Police investigations quickly revealed a terrifying fact. The pixie sticks Timothy had eaten contained cyanide, a highly toxic substance. Authorities acted swiftly to remove the suspect candy distributed that night before more children could consume it. The entire town was in shock at the possibility of someone intentionally handing out poison candy, and parents were gripped with fear, worrying for their own children's safety. As investigations progressed, the police began to suspect Ronald O'Brien, Timothy's own father. He was the last person with the pixie sticks and couldn't explain why he was the only one who had received the candy. Furthermore, it was discovered that Ronald had recently accrued significant debt and had taken out a $20,000 life insurance policy on each of his children just before Halloween, further heightening suspicions of his involvement in the tragedy. After more digging, police uncovered that Ronald had attempted to purchase cyanide shortly before the incident. Faced with this evidence, Ronald was arrested and put on trial for the murder of his own son. In court, he maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with the tragedy, but prosecutors presented proof that he had planned the crime to escape his debts. The trial drew national media attention, and Ronald O'Brien was ultimately convicted of murder and sentenced to death. After years of appeals, he was executed in 1984, but his story left a lasting impact on Halloween celebrations. From that year forward, the fear of tainted Halloween candy grew across the United States, and many parents began meticulously inspecting their children's treats. This tragic event led to the dark nickname Ronald earned, the man who killed Halloween. Since then, Halloween has never been the same, and inspecting candy on this night has become an essential part of the tradition. It was Halloween night in 2010 in New York City when 17-year-old Carl Jackson went out to a party with some friends in a neighborhood known for its decorations and festive atmosphere. Like many teenagers, Carl wanted to enjoy the night and have fun, not knowing that it would end so tragically. Dressed in a basketball player costume, he walked the streets excitedly, soaking in the mysterious energy of Halloween. As they walked, Carl and his friends were suddenly confronted by a group of teens who seemed to be looking for trouble. They started throwing eggs at Carl and his friends, which initially was taken as a harmless Halloween prank. Thinking it was just part of the holiday fun, Carl tried to ignore them, but the egging continued, hitting his clothes and face, frustrating him. Irritated, Carl and a friend decided to confront the group to try and resolve the situation. The confrontation quickly escalated, and the festive atmosphere of the night turned tense. One of the teens in the other group, appearing to be under the influence of drugs or alcohol, became more aggressive, shoving Carl and making threats. What no one expected was that he was armed. In a moment of rage and recklessness, he pulled out a gun and shot Carl, fatally striking him in the chest right there in the street, surrounded by Halloween decorations. Carl's friends were in shock, and the incident quickly drew a crowd. The police were called, and ambulances arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Carl was declared dead at the scene, turning Halloween night into a real-life horror. People nearby were horrified and couldn't believe that something so brutal could happen on a night meant for fun. News of Carl Jackson's murder spread quickly across the city, shocking New York and making headlines on every network and newspaper. The police launched an intensive search to find the shooter, gathering statements and analyzing footage from nearby security cameras. After weeks of investigation, they were able to identify the suspect, a young man with a history of violence and gang involvement. The trial of Carl's attacker raised a lot of concerns about public safety, especially on festive nights like Halloween, when streets are crowded and there's a general sense of celebration. During the trial, the attacker admitted that there was no clear motive for the crime and that he was just messing around in a way that went way too far. He was convicted of murder and received a lengthy sentence. Carl's death not only changed the lives of his family and friends forever, but it also left a mark on the city. Since then, stricter safety measures have been implemented during Halloween in many New York neighborhoods, with extra patrols to ensure a peaceful night. Carl's tragedy is remembered each year by his family, who hold vigils in his honor and share his story as a warning against senseless violence. Today, Carl Jackson's story serves as a reminder of how quickly a night of fun can turn into a tragedy. New York City still mobilizes during Halloween to keep the streets safe, and Carl's case remains in the collective memory as a way to remember that the spirit of unity and respect should always prevail, even on the scariest of nights. On Halloween night in 1981, the city of Manhattan, New York, was full of parties and costumed people. Amid the festive atmosphere, the couple Teresita and Melvin Letterman were on their way to a party on the Upper East Side. They were well known in the neighborhood, and Teresita was especially excited, dressed as a fairy, while Melvin wore a skeleton mask. But what began as a fun night would quickly turn into a nightmare. As they approached a quieter corner, a masked man confronted them. The stranger appeared to be in his own costume, wearing a black hood and holding a knife in his hand. Thinking it might be a Halloween prank, they tried to stay calm, hoping he'd laugh and go on his way. But the man kept staring at them disturbingly, and before they could react, he lunged at Teresita. Melvin tried to defend her, but the attacker pushed him down. Amid the terror and screams that echoed through the deserted street, the man stabbed Teresita multiple times before fleeing into the darkness. Melvin, stunned and injured, crawled to his wife, but it was too late. The attack had been fatal. Neighbors had already called the police, but the assailant had vanished without a trace. The investigation began immediately, but there were few clues. Melvin's only description was of a tall man wearing a hood and mask, a common sight on Halloween night, complicating the search. The police questioned local residents, but many mistook the suspect for other costumed people they had seen that night. The case quickly gained media attention, and fear spread through the neighborhood, as no one knew who the killer was. Weeks went by, and the case seemed to go cold. The lack of witnesses and concrete evidence kept the mystery unsolved. Then, months later, an anonymous tip came to the police. The caller claimed to have information about the killer and mentioned a specific suspect who had a record for violent crimes and lived in the area. The tip pointed out that he owned a mask similar to the one described in the attack. The police decided to act on the lead and track down the suspect, named David Chapman, who had a history of aggressive behavior and mental disturbances. When interrogated, his alibis were confusing and contradictory. During a search of his home, they found not only the mask Melvin had described, but also a knife with traces of blood, which was sent for testing. With advancements in DNA techniques, they confirmed that the blood belonged to Teresita. David was arrested and brought to trial, where he denied any involvement. His lawyers argued that the evidence was circumstantial, but the prosecutors presented the DNA as decisive proof. After a long and turbulent trial, the jury found David guilty of Teresita's murder, and he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Melvin, still shaken, watched the verdict in silence, bearing the pain of losing his wife in such a tragic way. After the trial, Teresita Letterman's case became a warning in New York City. The city implemented stricter safety measures during Halloween, urging people to travel in groups and avoid dimly lit areas. Still, for Melvin and those who knew Teresita, Halloween night would never be the same. To this day, neighborhood residents remember the story as a reminder of the dangers that can hide even on the most festive nights. Teresita is remembered as a beloved figure, and her story is still shared as a cautionary tale about the importance of remaining vigilant, even during celebrations. If you like this content, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. Thank you and see you in the next video.